So, topic for today's presentation is how much do I need to retire? And obviously, it's something that everyone wants to know, and everyone needs to know in order to feel comfortable to be able to stop work at some point. So, we'll get into that and see what comes of it. Now, unfortunately, being in the financial advice business, I've got to give you a warning that says anything that you say and anything that I say and use today is only general advice and doesn't apply specifically to you, and you need to take advice specific to your situation before doing anything about it. Okay, so what does retirement mean to you? And it means different things to different people, and it really is a really individual thing. For some people, it's all about being able to travel and tick off items on their bucket list. For some, it's a big chance to spend a lot more time with family, particularly grandkids. To be able to volunteer and give back to the community in some cases. In some cases, financial concerns basically are overwhelming. So there's all those sorts of issues that that people are facing, and with that, I suppose it can be hard for some people to kind of concentrate on or think about some of the other issues until and unless they feel confident about their financial position. So I suppose they're kind of interrelated, but as I say, there's a lot going on there. But importantly, the big question is what does retirement mean for you? So these are, I don't know if you've ever come across the website Humans of New York, but basically it was a guy who just started going around and interviewing people on the streets in New York. And there's all these mini stories of people that he runs into. And these are just some of the ones that I found in terms of people who are about that retirement age. I love these guys on the left, the kind of punk look, and we just want to go to the races because we can dress up and drink champagne before midday. It's kind of is a fantastic thing. But for others though, like this guy, it's kind of a situation where they thought the idea of retirement was was about stopping work, but didn't really have anything else to fill in the time and had someone else fill it in for them, so decided to go back to work. And for others, it's an opportunity to go and do a lot of other things. So, like I say, it's very individual, very different. But it doesn't really matter what it means to anyone else. What's important is what it means to you and what your plans are. And I suppose in talking to people over the years, one of the things that I've come across a lot is people often know what they're retiring from, but they don't have a really clear plan on what they're retiring to. And it can be a really difficult transition in that sense, where if you're not sure and you've got you've been running a business or working in a profession or something like that, you've had a lot of demands on your time. Obviously there's people coming to you for advice, and you're constantly busy making decisions, and you're important and things like that. And then all of a sudden you stop. As someone I was talking to at one stage who'd run his own company, he said, you quit and quit on the Friday, and on the Monday you go and you become someone who used to be important once. The phone doesn't ring, the emails stop, and you've got to fix your own computer system. So it's really important to understand what you're retiring to as much as it is what you're retiring from. But one of the things that I suppose one of the important things to consider is that can actually change over time. And what we often see is that there can be a number of different phases of retirement. Not everyone goes through these, but certainly it's not an uncommon thing. And the first phase was actually a client of mine who described it to me as this. And he'd run a business for 30 odd years and had never really had an extended holiday. And when he sold his business and retired, and he had the money and the time to go and do whatever he wanted. And so basically he proceeded to tick off almost everyone's bucket list travel destinations. And he described it as a case of me time. It was a chance to go and do all the things that he put off doing for all those years, all the sacrifices that he'd made. And now it was a case of playing catch up. And, that lasted for a couple of years for him. But it was funny. It got to a point where he and his wife were sitting in a villa in Tuscany, overlooking the hillside, the rolling hillside, the vineyards, all the rest of it, sitting outside with a bottle of Chianti and a salami, some and an antipasto platter, watching the sun go down. And they looked at each other and they said, "You know what? I'm bored. I just want to go home." And so then there becomes a question of, well, what are we going to do now? And the first phase can be a really expensive one if there's lots of travel and things like that you want to go and play catch up with. But then things can settle down a little bit, and it gets more into a routine that you can go and develop. The other thing with that, though, is that if one partner is retired before the other, they can have already developed a life. And, we see this particularly with guys where, they've been so caught up in their work, and, a lot of social activities and things have been tied into their work life. Then all of a sudden they stop working, and as I said, they're no longer the important person that they once were, but all their social contacts drift away as well. And they can end up just hanging around the house, hanging around asking their wife, what are we doing now? And, Mark was certainly like that, where, she basically got to a point where she told him to get out the door and go and find something to do, because he came up to her on a Wednesday morning and said, "So we're going shopping today," because that was the day she normally did the grocery shopping. So, it's important to kind of develop that life for yourself as well. And that can go on for a while, and then things change again after a while, and that's often due to declining health, either in one person or their partner. And the active phase tends to recede, and there tends to be a much more passive phase where the activities are probably closer to home. There's a lot less travel. Certainly it's more difficult to get out and about and things like that. And lastly, depending on how someone ages, there can certainly be a period of extended poor health as well, and potentially aged care. So, there's lots of things that change there, but importantly, your spending generally varies across these. And the best way I've heard it described is that it kind of goes in the shape of a smile. So, if you think about a smile, me time is a really expensive time where there's a lot of money going out the door on travel and things like that. And then that'll kind of decline over time as we get into more of a routine that's closer to home, and more of a passive lifestyle as well. But it can spike again towards the end if our health deteriorates, and we do need to spend more money on healthcare and things like that. So, probably the smile shape of spending is an important one to be aware of. But like I say, thinking about retirement and what you might be doing, it's really important to understand what your plans are and to have a plan. If you think about it, I'm certainly not an artist, and probably one of the scariest things for me, and perhaps for many people, is if someone presents them with a blank canvas and says, "Well, can you go and draw something on that?" The big question is, how do I go and fill that? The scariest thing for me is a blank canvas, because I could draw anything on there, but how do you actually decide what you're going to do? If someone said to me, "Go and draw a dog," or "Go and draw a tree," or something like that, that'd be pretty easy. But the idea of being able to choose anything and not knowing what to choose can be overwhelming. And if that's the case for just for drawing something on a bit of canvas, imagine what it's like in your life. So, what I often tell people is that it's far easier to start things before you retire than it is just to stop working on one day and expect you just be able to fall into something the day after. essentially it comes back to what being retired means to you and what's important to you and what's going to motivate you to get out of bed each day. So, and I think in this case, it's important to think about the time that's available to you, because without recognising that, time can really just slip by. Bill Gates, he's not the silliest bloke in the world, but one of the things that he's said in the past is that most people overestimate what they can do in a year, but underestimate what they can do in 10. And if we think about someone retiring at age 65, life expectancy is about 20 years. Now, what that means is that 50% of people live longer than that, and we'll come back to this. But if you think about 20 years, it can seem like an incredibly short period in some respects. If you look at that as being, well, that's how much life I've got left. But, if you look at it, 7,300 days or 175,200 hours, which is a lot of time, obviously. A lot of people think they're going to do a lot of travel in retirement and things like that as well. So, if we think about, well, how much travel would you go and do in retirement? And I know we've got someone on the call today who spends a lot of time traveling. But for many people, maybe a couple of weeks to a month might be a lot. For some others, maybe 2 months. But I think the most that many people would consider in terms of a retirement plan, or an amount of travel that they might undertake, is kind of 3 months a year, which is a lot. But if it's 3 months, well, that leaves kind of 40 weeks a year in which you've got, that you're spending at home, and you've got to go and fill that time in somehow. So, if we allow for weekends, and let's just think about retirement as being something that you do during the work week, and your weekends don't really change that much. So you've got 200 days a year available to you, 4,000 days over the next 20 years. Now, look, let's make it easy and say, look, we're not going to work at this retirement thing for a full working day. So we'll allow sort of 4 hours of the day, assume a normal 8-hour work day. Not that too many people do that, but let's just assume for the sake of argument. We'll allow half of that time for just doing stuff around the house and socialising and doing a few more things like that. But that means you've got 4 hours a day for 4,000 days over the next 20 years, which is 16,000 hours that you need to do something in. Could be really, really exciting when you think about it like that, or it could be terrifying. I mean, it's a lot of episodes of days of our lives. But when we think about that, the important and planning for that, the important thing is to consider where we're at now. Because when you're in a phase of life, it can be really difficult to kind of see beyond that and see how it fits into the overall. So this is a graph that, or a chart we've developed just to try and help you understand where things are at. So if we look at this, let's look at the dotted line first. And what that is basically your future potential earnings from work. So, it kind of starts here at about age 6 or 7 when you started going to school. And it kept going up. The more educated you got, the more you invested in yourself, the more valuable you became as a business person or as an employee. And when you started work, effectively that was the highest point that your future earnings would ever be at, because from then on, every day you worked was one less day that you were going to be in the workforce. And so your future income would, your potential future income would be coming down. But that will come down over time until you get to the point at which you retire, assuming you retire completely from work, and there's no more money coming in from your personal efforts. Okay. The other side of the graph is this solid line here, which is your investments, your assets. And as we can see, it kind of goes along, dips down into the negative, in our late teens, early 20s as we go and pay for that education, and possibly some travel and cars and things like that to get ourselves established. But as soon as you start working, it starts going on a rapid increase. Okay, and we go through this period, 20s to 30s, where we're really building both ourselves and our asset base. And it's a really steep curve. And then we're consolidating from there, We might get married, buy a house, have kids, things like that. And it'll all kind of accelerate between our mid-40s through to kind of late 50s. And that's when, we really hit our straps as far as actual income per annum. We've also got massive amounts of dollars going out the door, especially if you've got kids and paying off mortgages and things like that. But your assets are still growing, whether it's just through superannuation contributions, paying off debts, things like that. And it's got to get to a level up here where basically it's going to provide an income for the rest of our lives. Okay, so we look at this: how much income do you need each year? Because that's going to determine how quickly that line goes down. And we kind of think about from age 60 on, commitments are reduced. If you've got kids, generally they're out the door by then. Hopefully they're out the door by then, in my case. You start to consider your lifestyle more, and that's the major focus now. It's also a time when many people start to think about their legacy and and what they're going to leave behind, whether that's to society or the community or the world as a whole, or just within your family as well. And that can be kind of a financial thing, or it can be something else. Whether it's kind of the family values and things like that. And certainly from age 80 on, that tends to be one of the biggest things is, kind of how do you want to be remembered? So that kind of helps us, if you think about where you're at the moment and put yourself on that timeline, you can kind of see where things are going, and also you can get a picture of what's ahead of you there. Which gets us to the question that everyone wants to know, which is how much do I need to retire? And there's a really short answer to that. It varies. There's not one answer for everyone. Certainly not a case of one size fits all. Now, when we think about it, the first thing that we've got to think about is how long do we need to plan for? Now, this may not be really clear, but I'll talk you through it. So what it is, it's looking at life expectancies, both for individuals and a couple. And if you're a healthy male at 65 years of age, you've got a life expectancy of 85, which means you've got a 50% chance of living beyond that age. You've got a 25% chance of living beyond the age of 90 and a 10% chance of living beyond 94. Ladies have it a little bit better. So the life expectancy is a couple of years longer than the blokes. And there's a 10% chance that someone a healthy female at 65 will live beyond 96 and a half. But if we think about you as a member of a couple, assuming that you're both healthy at age 65, then those figures push up a hell of a lot. So there's a 50% chance that one of you will still be alive over 90 or will live beyond 90, a 25% chance that you live beyond 94, and a 10% chance that there'll be someone living beyond 97 and a half. So that's a long time that we need to plan for. And this idea of just looking at your life expectancy and saying, well, I've only got to worry about 20 years is really something that that needs to change, because I say the life expectancy is we're actually gaining days the longer that we live, and and that's increasing every year. So in terms of thinking about that, well, what I want to do is get you to think about not so much the amount of capital you need to build up, rather focus on how much income do you need. So a lot of people will say, well, I don't really know. And so the first port of call is to say, well, have a look at what you're spending now. For some people that can be a really difficult thing to address as well. So look, if you look at your after-tax income and then just work out how much you're saving out of that, and that the difference is how much you're spending. Now, if you're not going to work, then you're going to save on things like work, travel to and from work, clothes for work, professional associations, all those sorts of things. So the expenses will come down a little bit, but you'll probably find you're spending more on leisure activities. So there might be a bit of a trade-off there, and it might stay kind of level. The other thing to consider too is how much travel or other activities that are important to you are you currently doing compared to how much you'd like to do if you had more time. and more opportunity. So, like I say, that's kind of a starting point for working out, well, how much income are you going to need each and every year? And like I say, there's that's just looking at things from a constant. But if we think about kind of a smile-shaped spending pattern, then it might be a bit higher earlier on, and then reduce over time as well, before potentially ramping up a little bit later. So, what do some of the organisations who look at these things and research these things, what do they say in terms of the income levels that people need in retirement? And this is kind of a starting point, I think. It's not necessarily going to be right. It's certainly not going to be right for everyone, but it's a starting point. And if I come back to that in a sec, I suppose probably thinking about your income needs as well, it's probably easiest to think of them in a couple of different stages, or a couple of different buckets, if you like. And the first is your essential spending. And this is the kind of stuff where, if you didn't have the money to spend on this, life would not be worth living. It's being able to maintain a roof over your head, food, all the bills, clothing, kind of the essential spending. Now, everyone's definition of essential needs are going to be different. I'm sure you can talk to some Hollywood celebrities, and if they didn't have their personal private jet, then life would not be worth living. So it really is an individual thing, but you need to work out what those essential needs are, what you cannot and are not prepared to go without. And then once you've got that as a baseline, then we can think about, well, okay, what are the nice to haves, the things that they make life all the more worthwhile and and enjoyable. But if push came to shove, if things really did get tight, or or something blew up, then you could do without. I know of someone at the moment where their daughter is in a really difficult situation overseas, and basically trapped overseas because of a few issues, and he's having to support her. Now, that's one of those things that given the trade-off, he's not going to abandon his daughter, but what that may mean is that he's just got to cut back to what is essential, and maybe give up some of those lifestyle wants. And I think most people in that situation would probably make the same decision. So that's where it's handy to kind of think about those things in different buckets. And lastly, there's the issue of legacy, and whether you want to leave money for kids, for other family members, or for some other worthy cause, whether it's a charitable bequest or something else. That's kind of the thing that's left over, or the thing that is there if there is any money left over. And I think that's probably the easiest way to think about it. And then we can look at accounting for that separately as well. As I say, though, thinking about retirement standards and thinking about what some of the research organisations look at. So ASFA is the Association of Super Funds of Australia, and this is what they have put together as kind of a retirement standard. So, looking at it, we've got different levels for whether you're a single or a couple. But what they are is basically saying for a comfortable lifestyle, a couple needs about $60,500 a year. Okay, you can see what they're talking about. So comfortable retirement can be involved in leisure and recreational activities, and a pretty good standard of living. An occasional international holiday and domestic holidays, private health insurance, good car and things like that. Now, this all assumes that you own your home outright and are relatively healthy. And look, there are, I'll just see if I can skip over to here. With that, sorry, I'm just going to make sure that you can see this one. So what we've got, this is the difference between the two of them. I'll just increase that so you can see. So, for a comfortable retirement and annual holiday in Australia, regularly eat out at restaurants. You can afford bottled wine as opposed to a modest retirement where it's cask wine. Regular haircuts at a good hairdresser as opposed to basic cuts at a salon or a pension at a special day. Being able to replace kitchen and bathroom over 20 years. Okay, and there are actual dollar figure budgets broken down, just so you can see how that's been arrived at. Okay. Now, like I say, that's kind of a starting point, but for many people, that's that's not really something that that they're focused on. They're looking at something at a higher level than that. But like I say, it helps to if you really don't have much of an idea about what you're spending and what your needs might be, then that can be a really good place to start, because you can look at that and say, well, okay, we need to spend more on this because that's what we enjoy doing. And you've got that starting point there, and like I say, you can play around with it based on what is important to you. Now, just so we understand as well what ASFA assumes with this, and that's that you start out with $640,000 worth of assets, and over time they will gradually decrease. Okay. It also assumes that you start drawing income entirely from your own asset base in this. Just in this graph, but then entitlements to the age pension kick in, and that's the slightly lighter shaded bar down the bottom there. Okay, and that carries through till effectively the money is going to run out at around age 100. But what it does also assume is that you get a constant investment return of 6% per annum. It does not change. It's 6% each and every year, not a case of 10% one year, -2 the other, minus one another, and then we get back to 6% average. Although I don't think that worked out to be quite right, but it's saying that every year you're going to get a 6% return, not any of those ups and downs that we know happens. The problem with that is for many people who'll be looking at this, what if you don't qualify for the pension, and you're not likely to ever qualify for the pension? How does that play out? What if you need more income than $60,000 a year? I mean, I've got clients who struggle to spend $3,000 a month, and I've got clients who struggle to live on $200,000 a year. So there are a big range of what is acceptable and what's important to people. And what if you just don't fall within those bands? This is a big one, and I know the GFC is now 10 years ago, but I think that's kind of seared in everyone's memory. What if investments don't always go up? How is that going to affect you? And the other thing is what if you want to leave a legacy? So, essentially we do need to look at things differently. We don't, and many people just don't believe some of this modelling because it assumes things that it's just never going to happen. They're effectively built to fail. So, recognising that there is no certainty, life is variable, obviously, and so are investments. We need to take this variability into account when planning, and we need to consider as part of that what are the acceptable odds of success? Because if there isn't any certainty, there's always going to be an element of doubt in there. And if we apply that to long-term modelling, what are acceptable odds? If I gave you a 50% chance of winning or losing a bet, is that something you'd take? If I gave you a 90% chance of winning or losing, is that something you'd take? I mean, people go and buy lottery tickets, every day of the year, and the chance of winning those is 1 in, I don't know, 6.5, 8.5 million, whatever it is. You got more chance of being struck by lightning twice on out the front of the same door as you do of being a winner in a lottery, and yet people will go and constantly do that. So, what are the acceptable odds of success for you? So what does this mean in terms of real life? So what I want to do is just give you an idea of what else is available to look at this modelling and to try and work out, well, okay, how much do you need, and what can that look like, taking into account variability in investment income, in variability in investment returns, variability in income needs, and looking at things over a life expectancy to kind of age 100 as well. So I'm just going to look at a scenario that I've put together for clients who are retiring at 65 with 2 million in investments, and I'm doing that basically because that takes the age pension out of the equation. Okay, and it's a nice round number for me to start with. Now, what I'm going to assume is that for the first 2 years, they're basically going to indulge themselves, and it's going to be a case of me time. So instead of, we'll forget about what their normal living expenses might be, and we'll assume that they're going to go and spend 150,000 a year. But after that, things will drop off a little bit, and they'll come back to somewhat more of a routine. There'll still be some travel, obviously more than what's permissible under the ASFA standards, but they might have got over that a little bit, and spending will come back to about 70,000 a year, and then from 75, their spending's going to drop off a little bit as well. So we'll pull that back to 60,000 a year. But then, assuming that something does happen with their health, and they're going to need to ramp that up again. Okay. Now, with that too, I'm going to look at two different investment portfolios, again, just for an example, and one with 50% in growth assets, so shares and property and the like, and one with 60%, just to see how the difference in those portfolios affects things. The more you've got in growth assets, the higher the return should be over the longer term, but also the more up and down those investments are going to be on a year-to-year basis, because the growth assets, the shares, are more likely to see that upward and downward movement over a short period of time. So they're the returns that we're using. That's from our research team in terms of their forecast returns for those portfolios. They are probably conservative. They're certainly much lower than what the historic returns have been, but we're also in an environment where interest rates are pretty low. So we're starting from a pretty low base as far as their assumptions go. And I'd much rather be conservative with our assumptions here, to give you something that looks a little bit more meaningful and something that you can rely on, rather than assume that we'll go and shoot the lights out and have you turn around in 10 or 15 years' time and say, well, it hasn't worked out because we spent more than what we thought more than what we probably should, because we assumed we'd earn too much. And we're going to look at the variability of investments as well, but I'll assume the historic rate of variability in those returns. So that's probably higher than what's appropriate for these levels of return. But we've got to use something there, and like I say, I'd rather use the historic level. So what does that look like? The last thing is, we'll assume that you're remaining in your own home, because all these scenarios assume that you own your own home, and we're going to assume that you don't go and downsize. So you're just staying in the current home, and that's a kind of a safety net that sits there. Okay, so what does this graph show you? So you can see the two different bars now, and like I say, what this is showing is that at age 90, there's a couple of % chance that things might not work out. Okay, and or the other way to look at it is that there's a 97 or 98% chance of success. Okay, at age 95 in this scenario, the more conservative portfolio is slightly ahead, but essentially there's about a 90% chance of success there. And at age 100, there's about a 70% chance of success. So there's a bit of a drop off between 95 and 100. Okay, but this also assumes that we don't make any changes over that time, and it also assumes that you're still living in the family home, and you haven't gone and made any changes to that. So just thinking about that, if there's probably very few people at age 95 with health issues who are living at home. So aged care is certainly something that's a possibility at that point in time. And what we're also saying is that I suppose at 95 your income needs probably won't be that great. unless you have a reasonable degree of health issues. So yeah, like I say, we haven't taken into account age pension entitlements, and they would have kicked in somewhere along there as well, as the asset base reduces. So yeah, that gives you a bit of an idea. And like I say, we can produce these for individuals, so you can see, well, you know, what does the scenario look like given what we plan on doing. Okay, and it's a really, really powerful tool, because, like I say, most people just don't believe and with good reason, don't believe most models, because it assumes that you get that constant rate of return. And the reality is, we know that just is not going to happen. So, as I was saying, what's an acceptable risk for you? Is a 90% chance of success at age 95 acceptable? If not, what is? How much certainty do you require to be comfortable? Looking that far down the track, bearing in mind that if I make a slight change to the assumptions in those models, the outcome is going to be significantly different. If we increase the investment return by only 0.5%, then that would change things dramatically. If we changed inflation rates as well by 0.5%, that would dramatically change things too. So there's I suppose the models are only as good as the assumptions that drive them, but it's certainly something that it's better than the traditional method, I think. And the other thing about it is that it's not something that you do once and kind of just set it and forget it and see how it goes. Keep your fingers crossed for 30 years. This is something that we look at with people on a regular basis, so you can monitor the progress of it and see how things are tracking. And if there starts to be a deterioration, well, then you can start to make decisions around that. And make changes before it gets to the point where where you're likely to run out of money. So again, I suppose thinking about success, it comes back to what's important to you. And as I say, this comes back to the idea of making decisions and making judgments around what's important to you. If the starting point is we want to hit all of these things, and we get a GFC, then would you still be satisfied if all your essential needs were met, all your lifestyle wants were met, but you couldn't leave that legacy? Would that be enough for you to define that as a successful retirement? Again, in this, we haven't assumed anything around the family home, but if you left your children the family home, if that's the criteria is to leave something for the kids, if you're able to leave the family home without any debt, and the rest of the investments that you've been able to build up were able to provide an income for you, would that be defined as successful for you? So, like I say, it's important to think about these things early on, and to build plans around that, because it's much easier to make decisions dispassionately, and without the emotion of looking at investment markets changing and unexpected things occurring. It's easy to think about it in advance and say, well, okay, if something happens, what are we going to do about things, and what's going to be acceptable to us? It's obviously easier to contemplate those things in advance. It's a little bit different to go and enact them, but at least if you've had to think about it and considered it, it can certainly be a lot easier to deal with later. So the other thing is are there any safety nets? What is there that you can do to kind of limit those risks? Well, one thing for people who are very risk averse, there is the option of buying a guaranteed income for the rest of your life. Okay, now the downside of that is that you give up access to some or all of your capital. Effectively, what you're doing is you're taking the money that you've built up and you're handing that over to an institution, and they say, well, we will give you this amount of income for the rest of your life, or for a period that you nominate. Now, there's all sorts of variations possible with that. and I'm not going to go into the details of that, but essentially that's what you're doing. Now, I suppose for someone who doesn't have any children and who doesn't want to, doesn't need to leave any money behind for anyone else, then that's certainly is a reasonable option. The only thing again with that is that you need to be conscious that the amount of money that you hand over is effectively gone, and you'll get it drip. You'll get an income stream drip fed back to you. So, if you want some flexibility, then you certainly wouldn't go and give that to give away all your capital there. The other thing to think about is, for many people, the age pension is going to provide that security for part of their income. We haven't gone into it, but if you're a couple and you've got between $380,000 worth of assets and about $800,000 worth of assets, you're going to be entitled, or you're likely to be entitled to some level of age pension. And what that does, particularly if we look at some of those graphs where asset levels are declining over time, what that does is it just allows you to draw less from your own assets to provide yourself with that income. So it increases the lifespan of your own investments. As I say, it provides that security. Now the governments are likely to, they changed the rules around that last year, and they may do that again in future, but essentially there's always going to be a safety net there at some point, because that's one of the things that we as a society are committed to. We don't want to see people living in poverty. It's just a question of at what point will that cut in. What other options are there? For some people, working after retiring is also an option. And that's not necessarily just for the financial security that provides. For some people, it also provides a really important reason for getting up and kind of validation of their worth to society. They're still able to contribute. There's a social aspect around work. And they've got somewhere to go and somewhere, someone who's counting on them. And that can be a really big boost to the ego, and a really big source of feelings of security and of well-being. So it doesn't necessarily be, for a lot of people, it may not necessarily be in paid employment, but some sort of volunteer capacity. But certainly paid work is something that shouldn't be discounted. I mean, a friend of mine retired a few years ago, and he's now back at work, but he's gone from working in finance, and he's now in a position where he has his absolute dream job. He's a yacht skipper. He does corporate charters and things like that. He delivers yachts. So, for a boat that's been, say, in the Sydney to Hobart, the skipper doesn't want to bring it back, and half the crew just want to fly back so they can get back to work. He's one of these people who fly down there, or get paid to fly down there, and then get paid to sail it back home. Or someone goes and buys a yacht somewhere, and they want it taken to their home port. He gets paid to go and pick the yacht up and sail it back to wherever it's got to be. And he also teaches people to sail, and he gets paid for doing that. And that's something that he loves doing. So, it's not necessarily the case. He would basically pay to be able to do that if he was honest. So, it's not necessarily the case that you have to look at it as being paid work as being something that's onerous or anything like that. And it's not something that should be discounted either, because there's a lot of benefits around that, particularly if it's something that you enjoy doing. And the other thing that we haven't considered is the fact that for most people, there's a lot of money tied up in your own home, and if need be, if things do go pear-shaped, there is the ability to sell that and downsize into somewhere smaller. We've seen that the government's also making changes to allow people to put part of those proceeds into super. Even if they're older than the age that traditionally you'd be allowed to contribute to super. So there's a lot of thought going into that as well, and that's it's not something that you necessarily want to count on, but it's certainly something that you can keep in the back of your mind there. And the other thing is like I say, if we think about the different spending buckets, We can look at, well, what are the must-haves, what are the nice-to-haves, and what are those other things that unfortunately, if we've got to compromise our own lifestyle versus doing good, or not necessarily doing good, but leaving something behind for someone else, we might choose to look after ourselves first. So where do we go from here? And I'm conscious of the time, and I don't want to drag this on for too long in people's lunch breaks. But where do we go from here? So I suppose the first thing to think about is, what does your ideal life look like in retirement? Both on a day-to-day basis. What are your plans? But also, what are the highlights? What are those things on the bucket list that you want to go and tick off? What does it look like for your partner as well? Do they have different ideas to what you do? I can't tell you the number of conversations that I've had with people where couples have come in and spoken to me, and we start talking about what their plans are, and you would wonder how it's never happened that they've never had this conversation, and they've both got these really different ideas. She wants to retire up to Queensland. He's never going to budge from Sydney. She wants to go travelling and backpacking around the world. He wants to go and get a motorbike and go and do things like that. Doesn't really, he's travelled so much for work that he's not really interested in going and doing that again. It's important to have those discussions, and obviously to work out what's important to both of you, and see what you both want to do, and what you can do together, and also what you might be able to do separately. Because just because you're retired, it doesn't mean you've got to do everything together. For most of us, we've led separate lives for a long time in terms of going to work and things like that. And just because you're retired doesn't mean you have to spend 24 hours a day, 7 days a week with your partner. In fact, that's probably the surest way to madness for many couples. A friend told me once that she was talking about her husband, and she said, I married him for love, but not for lunch. So it is important to have those separate interests and to be able to go and pursue those. And I think when we come back together, it makes that relationship stronger as well, because you kind of appreciate the other person as an individual. And there's a lot of cases where you'll see people who kind of the kids have grown up and moved out of home, and they ease back on work and might retire, and then all of a sudden they're sitting across the dinner table looking at each other and thinking, I actually don't know who you are anymore, and I can't remember why we got married. And you really don't want to get into that position, because one, it's really hard to go and start again and kind of fashioning a life as a single person, and harder for blokes than it is for ladies, because traditionally they've got more social relationships outside of the marriage. But also, it's a bloody expensive exercise, and it's the surest way to go and destroy your wealth, is to go and get divorced. Speaking from a really mercenary point of view. So it makes a lot of sense to look at that well before time, and to spend time with your partner, making sure that your relationship is strong. And the last thing is what do you think it's going to cost to achieve all this? Just looking at what your lifestyle is, what you want to be able to go and do, is a really important starting point. And as I said, there's a couple of tools there to help you. If you want to, if you want me to send through details of that Ask for Budget as a starting point, let me know and I'll send that through to you. But like I say, you need to have a starting point to understand what it is likely to cost you. And how can we help? So what we can do is, once you've got those goals, we can effectively break them down for you and reverse engineer them for you, to show you what's required to, from a financial point of view, to be able to make that happen. We can also run models like the one that we showed you, which will help you understand the probability of success. And you can then be in a position where you can decide, well, yes, I'm comfortable, I accept that level of risk. or no, I want to adjust things and look at different ways of doing things, so that that probability is increased to a level that that I find comfortable, whether that's 100% or or whatever that level is. But certainly having access to those tools we find really beneficial for people. And as a result of that, you'll basically feel more confident. So, like I say, we can provide a strategy basically to show you what you need to do and to help you get there. And then on an ongoing basis, even after you've stopped working, you're drawing down on that income. We can repeat that modelling on a year-by-year basis, so you can see how you're tracking along compared to what we thought you were going to be, because nothing stands still. And obviously your objectives and your position changes over time as well. And so what we can do is show you at any point in time how that looks, modelling that out, for to age 100 or whatever figure that you want us to choose. But certainly I wouldn't choose less than that. So that allows you to feel more confident in your position. So that's it for me. What we'll do is we'll conclude that here today. If there are any questions that anyone would like to ask, feel free, or please raise your hand and let me know, or fire a question at me in the chat box, or also get in contact with me after this, and more than happy to have a discussion around that as well. So I'll be asking for feedback. I'll send around a feedback request as well, just so we can find out what you've liked, what you've done, what you didn't like, whether you wanted more information on any of those topics, so that we can make this better in the future. And certainly this is something that we're going to be repeating in coming months. Not necessarily this topic, but there'll be a range of topics that we'll roll out, and we want to give people a chance to to find out all the information that they want. So thank you for attending. And as I say, if you've got any questions that you want to ask now, then hit me up in the chat box. Otherwise, I will talk to you later, and I'll wish you all a good day. Thanks.